Go ahead and have a seat. Welcome to Village Church. If this is your first time here, my name's Steve, one of the pastors here at Village Church, and as always, I am thankful and grateful to see each and every one of you this morning. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open it to Matthew chapter 22. We're going to be starting in verse 15, and it's Palm Sunday this morning, so I thought I'd talk about the government a little bit. Our preaching calendar, we are covering the final week of Jesus' life in the book of Matthew, and we talked about his triumphal entry a few weeks ago, so I didn't think it would be prudent to give you just a rehash of that sermon. So if you want to get in that mood, and go listen to that one on the website. But we find ourselves starting in verse 15 of Matthew 22 this morning, where Jesus specifically continues in a combative conversation with the religious rulers of the nation of Israel. He has, in his final week so far, cleared the temple. He has cursed a fig tree to show the just condemnation that the nation of Israel stood under at that point. Then he entered into a combative discourse, continuing to talk in parables with the religious leaders, the chief priests, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and on and on and on. And the Pharisees, in every way, were failing in their attempts to kind of trip Jesus up in this conversation. Jesus just kept responding with sage wisdom as though he was actually the author of Scripture, which, pro tip, he was. But the Pharisees were seeking to get Jesus to indict himself by making some sort of blasphemous statement. And they failed at that, and they figured they couldn't accomplish it. And so in verse 15, their strategy changes a little bit, where instead of just trying to get him in trouble with Israel, they kind of try to get him in trouble with the Roman government. If they can't get him arrested under the grounds of blasphemy, they were going to seek to get him arrested for the charge of leading people against the law of Rome. And this brings us to an important consideration for our day. How should you respond and consider the implications of following Jesus when it necessarily does, and it will, bring you into conflict with the culture that surrounds you, or even bring you into conflict with the government? You have to understand that Jesus was no anarchist seeking to overthrow the government, but he was also not a submissive coward in the face of wicked rulers. Jesus reveals a faith that will bring you into conflict with the rulers of the culture, just like he was brought into conflict with the rulers of culture. And if you follow the strategy of Jesus Christ, he employs a strategy that disarms them under the rule of God. And I want to begin reading in verse 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances." Always be wary when somebody tries to butter you up like that. They're not your friend. "Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. And if you read just at the face the things that Jesus says in this text, you will miss a great deal of the message and the subtext that you need when you're considering first what Israel thought about this tax and the purpose behind Caesar's image being on the money. And so there's a way of reading this to think that Jesus is just giving us a tip for the day: pay your taxes. You know, it is tax season, and you could take that from the text, but Jesus is saying something far more profound than that. If you think beneath the context and look at what's actually going on in this text, you see that Jesus is not going to please, ultimately, the Jews or Rome with this statement. So number one, I want you to understand that following Jesus will bring you into conflict with culture. Following Jesus will bring you into conflict with culture. Jesus could not and would not avoid the conflict that he experienced with the culture in his earthly ministry. And in verses 15 through 22, you actually see that Jesus, nor does he avoid conflict with the governing authorities of his day. He walks headlong into it. The Pharisees are an important group to understand in this text, and what we see in this text and beyond is that they were a group that chased cultural prestige with all that they had. Tim Keller has made the statement that the Pharisees were basically Bible-believing men who just happened to also be very mean men, and that is a reductionistic view that is not biblically true in any way, shape, or form. He is very wrong in that statement. The Pharisees were not Bible-believing men who just got up on the wrong side of the bed every day. Scripture presents the Pharisees as a group of men more committed to the standards and traditions of people above their commitment to the Scriptures. And they loved the prestige of leadership. They loved and demanded the confirmation of the culture around them to their standards above God's very revelation. And this put them into direct conflict with Jesus because Jesus perfectly upheld the law of God, perfectly understood the Scriptures, and perfectly taught with unparalleled authority the direct revelation of God. And because of that, he continuously came into conflict with the Pharisees. If the Pharisees were just these Bible-believing men with bad attitudes, then why would Nicodemus in John 3 need to come to Jesus and ask him, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" That very question shows you that these men did not understand the Scriptures because they did not give ultimate authority and ultimate sufficiency to the Word of God, choosing instead to follow their own traditions so that they could keep their cultural prestige. But the Pharisees failed in every regard to trick Jesus. And so at this point, they enlist the help of a group of men called the Herodians. Now you have to understand, we don't know a great deal about this group other than their allegiance to the reign of Herod and their defense of the influence of Rome in the nation of Israel. This was a group of Jewish Herodians that were literal traitors to Israel. Now you understand, the Pharisees actually hated these guys. They were on opposite ends of the spectrum. The Pharisees wanted the cultural prestige in Israel. The Herodians wanted cultural prestige in Rome. But the Pharisees were willing to do whatever it took to bring Jesus down, even partnering with people that they otherwise would have nothing in common with. When you seek cultural prestige, it will force you to compromise on your beliefs. It will force you to do exactly as the Pharisees have done. In Luke chapter 20, it tells us a little bit more about this strategy. It tells us that the scribes and the chief priests did seek to lay hands on Jesus at the very hour, leaving off from what we talked about last week. But they perceived that this parable was against them and feared the people. So they watched Jesus and actually sent spies who pretended to be sincere that they might catch him in something he said, so as to deliver him up to the authority and jurisdiction of the governor. That is where you see the strategy shift. They're not trying to hold him religiously accountable for execution now. They've failed. Now they're trying to trick Rome into doing their dirty work. So they spent time spying on Jesus in order to find a way to actually trip him up. And so they came up with the strategy of asking him about a very controversial tax in the nation of Israel. And so this tax was very controversial with the Israelites. It was a poll tax that everyone had to pay for using the roads that Rome offered to them. And the Jews, because of pious reasons that we will get into later, actually tried to refuse to pay this tax because of their Jewish identity, and that brought them directly into conflict with the rule of Rome. And so what they're trying to do is put Jesus into a place where he has to offend one of two groups. If Jesus supports the tax, that's going to turn the crowds against Jesus because the Jews hated the tax and they thought they could indict him that way. But if he tells the Jews they're right on not paying the tax, that will get him in trouble with Rome, and then Rome will come in and arrest them. So you see, there was no way for Jesus to avoid conflict with all of these groups because the Word of God kept putting him directly into conflict with the tradition and rules of men. And you have to see in that avoiding conflict with the world will ultimately demand you conforming to the world. Their strategy was, we got to get him to conform to one group or the other. That's their strategy. And if you continue to try to find some third way that will keep you above the fray, even where politics is concerned, you need to understand that that is going to cause you to synergize with some form of ungodly culture. These taxes were something that was forced upon them because of all that Rome provided, even with people whom they were oppressing at the time. When you follow Jesus, you are going to get into the same types of conflicts that Jesus Christ himself got into. And he warns us about that elsewhere. All unbelieving cultures will at some point be against you in one way or another. And you may find yourself in a conversation where you don't think that there is a win. You think that it's over. You're like, how can I answer this and save my livelihood? How can I answer this and preserve my dignity and culture? How can I answer this and preserve my cultural esteem with everybody around me? And you're going to be afraid and you're not going to want to risk it. When the key is, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, rather than fearing the risk, you simply need to adapt to the strategy that Jesus himself employed in this type of affair. Some will tell you to be a chameleon in culture and just do whatever's necessary to fit in. Some people will tell you that you need to avoid conflict, find that third way, stay above the fray, find a way to be some kind of Yoda-like person whose answers never make any sense to anyone, never making a statement that helps anyone in any way, and everybody just sits back and says, oh, what a sage. Friends, philosophers don't change the world because they never say anything that matters. You simply need to understand what Jesus does. He picks neither of those strategies. What does Jesus do? Commits to Scripture above all and trusts the authority of God's Word. That's the mindset that the Apostle Paul gives us in Romans 12:2 when he says, do not be conformed to this world. Instead, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. It's always the mind. It's always the way you think. Some of you need to stop having such stinking thinking and have your mind renewed. For what reason? So that by testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. What did Jesus do? He continued to point to the law of God. He continued to trust the supremacy of the Word of God in every single situation. Friend, Jesus stands apart from the culture by giving them a theological lesson from the Scriptures. And he does so in a not so subtle and not so winsome way. Jesus begins his response with an insult. I love that about Jesus. Before he gets into the nitty-gritty, he just looks at him and says, oh, you're a bunch of hypocrites. I love starting conversations with insults, but it doesn't always go very well for me. People tend to get offended. Jesus begins with this insult about their hypocrisy, and then he gives them the unfiltered truth of the Word of God. And you look at that and you say, well, all he does is he say, pay your taxes. Oh, friend, he says so much more than that. What Jesus does is he gives us an object lesson about the difference between good government and bad government. And so what I really want to ultimately talk about the rest of our time together is about what does it look like to be a Christian in good government, and what does it look like to be a Christian when there is bad government? Because that's exactly what Jesus talks about. And so secondly this morning, you have to understand good government comes from God. Good government comes from God. There is a righteous place for government in society, and there is a righteous place for government in your life. And when good government rules and reigns, God's people should celebrate. God's people should be thankful for that. God's people should worship Him in light of the good government that He does provide for us. And so these men bring before Jesus a fascinating question. And it seems to be a question out of nowhere. But the purpose for them sending spies was so that they could calculate what kind of question they were going to confront Jesus with. The purpose behind the poll tax and the reason that the Jews didn't want to pay it had nothing to do with the fact that they didn't want to pay taxes at its base level. Pious Jews in that day, whether it was an excuse or whether it was legit, they viewed paying the poll tax as disobeying the first two commandments. Caesar claimed to be God. And what, of course, would kneeling to Caesar as God forced them to do? Well, in Exodus chapter 20, just the first just verses 2 and 3 says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. And so Rome was seeking to get Israel to break their own law. The first law that God gives them is, have no other God before me. And Caesar demanded that they break that law. And the Jews looked at the poll tax, because his image was on the money, as an offering to a man who claimed to be God. And many pious Jews in that culture said, we won't do that. But beyond that, the second commandment of the Ten Commandments is, have no graven images. And they said, well, Caesar has put his image, and so we're not going to pay you something with your image, because that's the second commandment. You've already started with 2. Where does this stop? Now, a little more information. Israel did use this money to provide for themselves. And so that's where the conflict comes into play. Is like, well, you felt comfortable buying things with this money. You just don't want to give it to Caesar. And that is why Jesus' first response is, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. In other words, you can't get out of paying these taxes. Good government does demand you pay taxes. The big thing that Israel had was that Rome had at that point innovated road systems to the extent where all roads led to Rome. Because Rome had a civil engineering way of forming roads that made travel between trading cities and districts very easy. And the purpose of the poll tax was to pay for those roads. More than that, the purpose of the tax was also to finance the Roman military that, while they did in many instances oppress Israel at certain degrees, it also afforded them that when they were traveling outside of the Roman Empire, they enjoyed what was called the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana was great inside and outside the empire because it means peace of Rome. Any conflict inside of the Roman Empire or outside of the Roman Empire, if you declare that I am a subsidiary of Rome or I am a citizen of Rome, it carried great military weight with it. And it wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. You see the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts submit his Roman citizenship when he was about to be persecuted, and the soldiers backed off. Because to break the Pax Romana was to invite the terror of the Roman military on your life. Those are good things. We see in our day, we pay taxes. I don't know about you, but I like roads. I drove on a few to get here this morning, and so did you. I didn't see any horses running on trails heading into our parking lot. Those roads were great. How do you think they got paid for? But it's not magic. Our taxes paid for those roads. Another thing that our taxes pay for is our military. And whatever you think about what's going on in the world today, I like the fact that there's a few 100,000 people between me and the end of a gun. All right? I like that. I'm getting old. I'm not as good as I used to be. All right? I'm not going to keep up with anybody. All right? And so you have to understand that what Jesus is doing here is he's looking at them and he doesn't say pay Caesar. He uses a different word. He uses the term, and the reason it's translated to render is because that's the term that means to pay off a debt or to return something that someone gave to you. And so what Jesus is doing in this passage is he's looking at Israel and he's saying, there are reasons that you have to pay taxes for the good aspect of society on you. But why does Jesus then say the second part? Give to God what is God's. That's the rebuke on Rome. You see, guys, Jesus does not respond with a flat, the government can do whatever they want, they can demand whatever they want, is because that's not God's standard. Romans 13 aids us in understanding the righteous place of government, even a pagan government, in the life of a Christian. Romans 13:6 specifically speaks to the issue of taxes. That money was used to pay for the roads of Rome, the Pax Romana, and in Romans 13:6 it says, for because of this, because of all of those things, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God attending to this very thing. And so I've got some bad news for some more of the fringe elements. All right, I know you're out there. You cannot declare yourself a sovereign citizen and become some kind of anarchist. I need you to understand, biblically, that is a sin. You cannot do it. It goes against the Word of God. Like I said, I like roads. I like bridges. You know how much easier it is to get over rivers now? We lose way less people, all right? We used to lose a lot of kids crossing rivers. By God's grace, I've never lost a single one, all right? And I like those things. Christians should pay taxes to a just government. It is a reality of how we are supplied many of the benefits that we experience today. Again, about a week. That's how long you got to pay your taxes, all right? They'll come for them, I promise. But good government also understands its place from God's law. In Romans 13, 1-2, it specifically states that when we resist these things, we are resisting that which God has appointed. Text tells us, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. That is a vital principle. But I will tell you, most people misinterpret that text all the time. Most of the time when I hear people talk about Romans 13, they act as though it is a lease for the government to do whatever they want to, and we just have to accept it. We're just subjugated. No matter how unrighteous the government is, we have to follow whatever they say. But what you're not doing is exegeting the text. Where does the government get its authority? God. But more than that, it says good things in this text. Here's the trick with every atheist that comes into your life. Define good. Where does it come from? What is the standard by which Christians must measure what is good? The only just definition of good is going to be rooted in God's law. The law of God is the human moral understanding of that which is good. Therefore, government has a responsibility and is not to be self-seeking in any of its standards. The government has a responsibility to derive its moral leadership from the law of God, and it is the task of God's people to hold the government accountable to that. Further, in 1 Timothy 2, 1-3, it notes that we should be supportive and prayerful in our attitudes towards government leaders. The text says, Paul writing to Timothy, first of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is what? There's that word again. This is good, and it's pleasing in the sight of God our Savior. Why? Because it gives us a peaceful and quiet life that is godly and dignified. So understand, friends, peace and comfort in the life of a Christian is a good thing. Some of you just want to declare war on everybody all the time. You're nuts, all right? It's a good thing to want a quiet life. It's a good thing to want a peaceable life. Peace is a wonderful thing, and it is the responsibility of the government in righteous ways to deliver that into our lives. That is what we pray for. That is what we seek God for. That is how we intercede on behalf of our leaders. 1 Timothy 2 notes that it is a good thing that we should pursue in our lives. And in the United States of America, I don't know if you know that, but that's what we're in. We have a different type of government. And here's the interesting thing about being a Christian in the United States of America is that we have a place where we are invited to the table to aid the government in maintaining righteous footing in God's law. We have a democratic republic that actually says we're a part of this. We're a part of leading in the government. Therefore, those that look at Romans 13 and say that it instructs us just to accept whatever comes our way, friend, you're wrong. In our system, we actually have an obligation to be politically involved in order to aid the government in being righteous. And that is why Romans 13:7 is vital. After verse 6, 7 comes after 6, I don't know if you know that. The text says, pay to all what is owed to them. There's that render idea. You don't just pay them, you pay them what is owed to them. It's unrighteous to take it all. They only get part. Taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed. But here's the complicated part. Respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. Friends, the first two parts are pretty simple. The complication comes in the next two. Respect and honor are not deserved by everyone. Respect and honor are not deserved just because someone has a title of ruler, just because someone has a title of king, just because someone has any title under the sun, even in the United States of America. Therefore, because especially the context that we live in our democratic republic, to protest wickedness is something that is actually required of a Christian to be patriotic. Therefore, we have to call to advocate for a more righteous form of government. We are the salt of the earth. We are the light of the world. We are the city on a hill that cannot be hidden. Therefore, we have the responsibility to be the ones who advocate for righteousness and soul and society, because no one else has a just standard by which to do that. So yes, part of evangelism and a huge part of discipleship in our nation is our involvement in holding our leaders accountable, which leads to the flip side of Matthew chapter 22. If you exegete the text, you understand that Jesus actually attacks Rome in this statement to state that they are a bad government that is committing blasphemy. So, third this morning, bad government should be resisted. It's that simple. Bad government should be resisted. Look in verse 19. Jesus says, "Show me the coin for the tax." They brought him the denarius. Now, you got to understand, it wasn't that Jesus didn't know whose picture was on there. Jesus wasn't ignorant. We see him using money. We see him creating money out of fish earlier. All right? Jesus knows whose picture's on this. So this is what's called a leading question. Jesus knows that it is Caesar's picture on it, but in asking that, he's forcing the issue to say, whose picture is on there? The Jews have a point. This tax foundationally is to point to Rome as God and Caesar especially as God. It says, whose picture's on there? Caesar. Oh, well then render to Caesar what is Caesar. But then in his next statement, he makes two very important points. First, Caesar is not God. That was a harsh statement in that day and age. When he says render to Caesar what is Caesar's, he's humanizing Caesar by then saying, and to God what is God's. And so he's saying the picture of the man on that money is not a picture of God. And Jesus had that on high authority because he was God. Jesus, is that me on that picture? My glass is foggy? No, it's not me. That's another guy. So it ain't God. He says you render to God who's God. So it's the second point he makes there. Money might belong to Caesar, but you don't. You do not give yourself to Caesar. God is the ruler of life. Caesar is not the ruler of life. He's saying the essence of who you are, the body and physical form that God has given you, none of that belongs to Caesar. Your children don't belong to Caesar. Your home is not Caesar's. Your family is not Caesar's. Your worship certainly is not Caesar's. And so you are restricted. You can't give Caesar anything that belongs to God. And the Jews would have known that he's upholding the nature of God's power and authority over everything, especially the Roman government. He's making a statement that God rules Caesar. Friends, Rome wanted more than money. Rome wanted authority over life. And so when Jesus makes this statement, he's limiting Caesar, which no one was supposed to do. Throughout Scripture, God institutes three forms of government. And I think this is where we get ourselves confused. Beyond the individual, God gives us three forms. The first is, of course, the state. God does, even in the Old Testament, he ordains a civil form of government. That is the government of the state. But he's not said, that's the government, submit in all things. No, God instituted two other forms of government. He also instituted the government of the church. The church is separate from the state, But that's not saying the church can't be involved in the state. The church is supposed to be involved in the state. It's the state that's supposed to know its role in the life of the church. That's why during COVID, we ignored everything that they told us, because they had no authority in here. The government can come and have the authority to put out a fire in this building, but they have no authority to tell us when we can meet in this building. They have no authority to tell us how we can meet in this building. And they have absolutely no authority for me to have to set up chairs with anybody's names on it and make you sit 6 feet apart. And they can't tell me if you have to wear a mask when you're singing praises to the Lord God. They do not have that authority. They cannot tell us when, where, how, what we are supposed to do in our worship. God has given that authority to the church, not to the state. But there's another form of worship. It's family. God, the very first form of government that God ever formed was the government of the family. And so you have to understand these three spheres, and here's where we get ourselves wrong, is it sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but what you will do is you will divorce those three spheres so far apart from one another that you try to live a life in which they do not intersect or conflict at any degree, when the reality is God has formed sphere sovereignty in each of these places, but they inform one another. And so while the family has its government and nothing is supposed to supersede that in many ways, the authority of the church does involve the authority of the family, and the authority of the state comes into that at all. And you have to discern how biblically God sets all of these up as they influence the way that we rule in each other's lives. And so you cannot use the authority of the government of family to divorce yourself away from the authority of the church in your life of following Jesus Christ. It doesn't work that way. Nor can we declare ourselves sovereign citizens, go set up a camp somewhere and say, this is the nation of Village Church. The state has no authority over us. That's not the way that it works. That would be sinful and unbiblical. And so what Jesus is doing is he is informing us of how these things work. And it just makes common sense. There are a lot of good things about the government, so don't listen to people when they say we need to be anarchists and just bring down the government as a whole, and we should just set up tribalism all over, where we've got Team Woodlake versus Team Magnolia Green, and we're killing each other trying to steal each other's crops. I don't know about you, but those aren't the good old days. All right, I think like the median lifespan was about 30, all right? I'm already past that, so I wouldn't survive tribalism very long, all right? Nationalism is a good idea because it is God's way of putting authority over us to where we are able to accomplish good things, where we actually get to enjoy a quiet and peaceable life. But as COVID taught us, all of those spheres always, because of the curse of sin, are trying to conflict with one another. It was fascinating with, especially in the state of California, and I'm so thankful for Pastor John MacArthur, as he took a lot of bullets for younger pastors as being prominent in a state like California, where he took the state government on. And one thing media won't tell you is he won every single lawsuit that the state of California brought against him. Every single one. One thing you might not know about Virginia, it took us a minute to catch up, but there was a little bitty church in the nation of Eastern Shore, I consider that a different country, that sued the state of Virginia and won against the state of Virginia when they tried to tell churches that they weren't allowed to meet. And so after 9 weeks, we said, we got to get our act together. We got to be smarter than this. And we started meeting, and I'll tell you, unless people start dropping dead in the streets, we're never canceling another service here at Village Church, not for those reasons. And so one thing I can tell you is that I'll be here. You can choose to stay home if you want to, but I'm not going to stop meetings simply because the state wants to usurp the authority that Jesus has only given to his people. You have to understand that throughout Scripture, God institutes these things, and many people get this wrong because they get Romans 13 wrong. Romans 13, 3 through 5, as a text, means that the government has limited authority based on what God gives it. Look in verse 3 of Romans 13. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out the wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. Now, so many times people only look at the positive things that this says about government without asking one very simple question. The text starts in verse 3, rulers are not a terror to good conduct but to bad. What do you do when rulers are a terror to good conduct rather than bad? We do find ourselves in that position oftentimes, especially in our modern society. If the rulers are a terror on good conduct, then it is the rulers who are in sin and need to repent, and not those who are resisting wicked unrighteousness in society. Is there a place to call unrighteous forms of government out on that? Friend, there had better be. Verse 4 is vital. It says the government is a servant of God. That means the government does not have the authority to be self-serving. Therefore, to avoid the wrath of God, yes, you must submit to God's call for government, and when necessary, you must call the government to righteousness when it is unrighteous, because the government will then fall under the wrath of God. The government does not have the authority in the life of a follower of Jesus to make us do whatever it wants us to do. The government is not an autonomous form of rule that has the freedom to become tyrants in areas that God has not given them authority. That is the point that Jesus is making in Matthew 22. When you think about our government, there are plenty of places where they must, by Christians, be called to righteousness because no one else is going to do it. That is what God has given us the mission to do. Since the 1970s, over 60 million young babies have been murdered in sanctioned ways by the government in the United States. Don't call it a fetus, call it a child. I've been there when 3 of them came out of a woman, and they were human beings, weird looking ones, but they were still human beings. And they were humans in that womb from the moment of conception. The government does not have the authority to sanction the murder of the innocents. Who will speak for the unborn if the Church of Jesus Christ will not speak? Think about the transgendered agenda in our society. Friends, if you are mad at Disney, you should be mad at the United States military for parading a bunch of men pretending to be women as leaders. You realize the first female admiral, 4-star admiral, is not a woman. It is a man. You say, Steve, you're not a biologist. I know, but I know what a woman is. I've been married to one for 17 years. God gave me outdoor plumbing, gave her indoor plumbing. That's enough for me. I know what a woman is. Friends, in the state of Florida, the government did that which was righteous. Passed a law giving parents the right to teach sexuality. Get this, to children 8 and under. You want to talk to me? Doesn't go far enough. But at least there is righteous government in Florida that will go as far as to say, my 6-year-old son is my business, and no sexual pervert who wants to groom my son for immorality and wickedness has that right over my dead body. But in the state of Florida, a righteous law has been passed to stop groomers who have infiltrated the education system in order to evangelize young children for the purpose of immorality. If the church does not speak up, who will? They're not after me. They're not going to change my mind, and they know it. They're after our children. In the Old Testament, they weren't after the adults. They sacrificed children in the burning hands of the false god Moloch, and that has never changed in their agenda. The wicked and demonic seek to evangelize your children for their agenda. Who will stand in their path if Christians don't stand up and say something? It is wicked that we have a president who will stand before people and say that they have the right to groom my children. No, they do not, friends. We must be the people who stand up. You have to know what time it is. In Acts chapter 5, we have a good example of this. The rulers seek to exert authority over the apostles that they do not have. The rulers look to the apostles and say, "We strictly charged you not to teach in his name. Yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you intend to bring this man's blood on us." But Peter and the apostles said, "We must obey God rather than men." Friends, when the government reaches into immoral tyranny, it is the church of Jesus Christ, through the authority that God has granted. We must defy tyrants. And our day is vital for us to understand what is going on around us and adopt the attitude of Jesus Christ, rather than adopting the attitude of cowardice that so many that want cultural prestige are telling you to adopt. We must resist wickedness in soul and society. Our government is seeking to overreach the authority of God in many places, and God has given that authority to the family and not to them. We must stand against them. In the first century, the Christians constantly got themselves in trouble. Good trouble. It's time we start following their example. Pastor W.A. Criswell pointed out in a sermon many years ago that the Roman government was actually, historically speaking, one of the most tolerant and pluralistic governments that had ever been in the world. They allowed you to have whatever God you wanted to have, but they had one demand. You had to put that God alongside other gods as equal to those other gods. That was the pluralism that they wanted, and the church refused because Jesus was Lord over all. He wasn't Lord among many. Roman government also looked at the Christians and said, "You must give an incense offering to Caesar as God." Very simple request, but the church refused. That is what brought persecution in the first century. Many Christians were killed in the first 3 centuries of the life of the Church of Jesus Christ. I can't paint you another picture. It wasn't all roses. But understand that every Caesar died while Jesus lived. Every single Roman leader died. And then ultimately in the 3rd century, the entire empire of Rome fell. Guess what outlasted Rome? The Church of Jesus Christ. Guess what has outlasted every single empire since Rome? The Church of Jesus Christ. Guess what will endure until we walk physically into the kingdom of heaven? The Church of Jesus Christ. Friends, it won't be an easy road, but I can tell you, Jesus Christ has all authority in heaven and on earth. These very men, less than a week later, put him onto a cross and executed him. And Jesus Christ decided he didn't want to stay dead after 3 days. So he got up and said, "I'm the Lord of all." Jesus saves. A few application points this morning. First, prepare for cultural conflict through discipleship. It's hard to adopt biblical strategies when you don't know the Scriptures. It's hard to be passionate about the gospel when you're not living for it. If you want to endure cultural conflict, it's a discipleship issue. It's an issue of knowing the Scriptures, knowing the gospel, living for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Secondly, government is ordained by God, not the other way around. God does not need the government to ordain him, nor do I want them to. Any God that the government can ordain for me isn't God. God ordains the government. Third, honor and thank God for good government. There is a lot to be thankful for, friends. In the face of a lot of negativity, we're not underground this morning, are we? We're worshiping publicly. And many people have died over the centuries to secure that right for us, and I am thankful to God for that. Fourthly, pray for wisdom in restoring righteousness to the government. It takes a lot of wisdom. It takes strategy. It takes strategy to know just how much of your neck to put out there before they chop it off. All right? And so I know that these are difficult issues. Pray for wisdom and how you can resist tyranny. But then fifthly, always prepare to resist tyranny in the name of Jesus. There's a lot of wrong ways to resist tyranny. We're not those types of people. We want to ensure that we're doing it in the name of Jesus. It's risky. It's not easy. It takes a lot of strategy. But we've always got to be willing to do it.